Welcome to RCR Wireless News. I'm Martha DeGrasse, and I'm joined today by Philip Sorrells. He is Vice President of Strategic Marketing at CommScope. Philip, it's great to see you again.
And you as well, Martha. It's always great to be with our friends at RCR.
Well, thank you. We are talking today about investing in HetNets, a topic that you're very familiar with. Philip, I know that carriers realize they need to densify their networks, but they also realize that technology changes very quickly and they want to maximize the value of their investments. So can you tell us a little bit about what you're hearing from your customers and what their concerns are as they evaluate these opportunities?
Absolutely. Glad to do it. In fact, I'm reading a new report out today that's kind of a refreshing outlook on the whole topic of HetNets. What we've seen and heard and observed is that the maturity process is now starting to take place, and the different options that really fit into each of the different types of applications are now starting to kind of click into place. So one of the early problems with the discussion of HetNet and small cell is that when people would say the words small cell or HetNet, they had in mind a very specific type of application or a very specific type of product. And what's happened over the last 2 years is that people have broadened their thinking to really think more about the entire ecosystem and about the array of different possible solutions that could fit into each profile of different products. So that's starting to happen, and now that delineation between customer or operator problem and application and the right set of technologies to apply, that delineation is starting to occur, and it's allowing the operators, I believe, to start to move forward with using the HetNet to solve the core problem. I mean, we wouldn't have the discussion of HetNets at all if it wasn't basically being driven by a larger question of how do you add capacity. So those things are starting to click into place. Operators are now starting to be able to really identify and tag, this is the kind of problem I have, this is the kind of application, these are the kind of customers I want to serve, and here's an appropriate technology or product to solve that.
Okay, great. But those problems and those applications could shift a little bit in the years ahead. Are carriers looking at things like software-defined networks or cloud technologies to sort of create networks that are a little more flexible?
Oh, absolutely. So clearly today, one of the larger topics of conversation is virtualization, and how the overall implementation of virtualization, from software-defined networks to how the core gets re-engineered, to how the radio access network interface to the core gets re-engineered or rethought, all the way to the physical layer, things like what kind of antennas and what kind of core apparatus do we need, all the way to physically how do you even host those type of small virtualization type of networks. So clearly those advanced technologies are being discussed today. And I look for those to continue to advance. But I think what we'll see in 2015 and even in 2016 is actually a larger amount of physical implementation of those small cells, residential femtos, and all that type of application will continue to happen. We'll see more small cells being applied. We'll continue to see DAS type applications be the dominant way of serving the big, complex, multi-use, multi-operator, multi-technology, multi-frequency applications. But I think all that will really accelerate in 2015.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's, I guess, maybe 4 different spheres. There's the indoor DAS and the outdoor DAS, and then the indoor small cells and some outdoor small cells. And I think you have a little experience with all those areas. Is there any one of those 4 that you see really gaining a lot more traction in 2015?
Well, again, the question there becomes, where is the capacity problem and what does that application look like? What we're seeing today is that when you look at different verticals, hospitality, high-rises, healthcare, education, where there's a need for mobility and Wi-Fi to really coexist, those are starting to coalesce. Those are really starting to get some traction. Of course, there's competition. On the in-building side, there's competition between a DAS application or a traditional small cell application, an indoor small cell, and also what the large OEMs like an Ericsson and a Huawei are doing with their what I would call a mini remote radio head application. So there's there's still some nuances in those applications, but a lot of interest in those verticals, and that's being driven by the fact that the discussions that are happening today around carrier aggregation and how licensed and unlicensed bands can be used to serve both Wi-Fi type applications and mobility applications. Now there's some really interesting conversations around how to take that unlicensed band and use it in a mobile application for carrier aggregation. Operators are really interested in. They need the extra bandwidth, so that's really driving some interesting conversations. Now for us, again at CommScope, our portfolio is radio independent, so we're building platforms that will allow radio technologies, but whether they be small cells or mini remote radio heads or full radio heads, to be deployed in any of those ecosystems. And as you remember, Martha, last year we announced a new platform, a unified wireless infrastructure platform that we call I&E, and that platform is now starting to take good traction in those enterprise applications. It's aimed at just below stadiums and large, huge super venues, and just above small, let's say 3 to 5 story applications where you may have one building owner and one tenant, kind of in that mid-range. And the value of a unified wireless infrastructure like our I&E platform is it still allows the owner of that enterprise to have multi-operator, multi-technology, multi-frequency capabilities. And that's good for scaling and serving a broad range of user interests.
Great. And how is the increased interest in LTE and unlicensed spectrum changing some of those conversations around I&E?
Well, specifically around I&E, the question is how does it coexist with Wi-Fi? And the I&E platform already provides for a Wi-Fi backhaul capability now. So if you have an I&E system, we can put your backhaul into that system, and that's ready to do that kind of capability now. On the access side, it takes a little bit more engineering, a little bit more thought about how to go about doing that exactly, but it's the kind of discussions that we're engaged in now with operators and with our engineering and technical folks now. So It really is creating some good conversation.
Great. Now, we used to hear a lot about outside-in coverage or using an in-building system to leverage the nearest macro cell, but I think that's changing and that the indoor coverage is becoming, well, most calls and data sessions do originate indoors. So can you talk a little bit about how the indoor coverage is really becoming more central and not just playing off the macro?
Sure. Back in the days, the original indoor systems were called over-the-air repeaters. So that basically meant that there was an over-air access point. So you'd have a macro out in the field, and there would be a little radio or an antenna on top of the building, and it would hit a repeater, and then we would repeat that energy into the building. What's happening now is that the capacity demands and the user demands are so demanding that it makes more sense to really dedicate that radio resource to covering those venues. When you only were a 2G voice-only system, there was not really enough demand on the radio capacity to rationalize the investment of dedicating a radio resource to the building. And of course, that's now changing. We now see significant opportunities for that radio resource to really pay back in terms of service to any of these new verticals, hospitals, healthcare, education. All those things are now really good applications where having a fully integrated in-building system with the radio integrated inside the building really is on the right side of the economic equation of capacity versus cost.
Okay, great. And is the interference discussion changing as well? Is there more concern about interference within the building as opposed to interference with the macro?
I would say the conversation is pretty much the same. I think that most people now worry probably a little bit more about the outside ecosystem creating interference inside the building. But that's not always the case. Sometimes it is a question of outside, inside out. But more today, it's more about outside in. That's where I hear most of the conversations being about is what do you do with to mitigate interference from the outside coming inside the building. There's a lot of techniques for that, of course. We would strongly advocate the use of antenna systems that have a good amount of beam tilting capability, so that if you are having interference inside a building from a macro site, you can turn down the energy on that cell side by doing beam tilting, beam adjusting, and that typically will solve the problem pretty quick.
Okay, great. Okay, one other thing I do want to ask you about, I know that you have a lot of experience with DAS, distributed antenna systems, in which multiple operators may share a system, but we haven't really seen that much yet with the small cells, although there are a couple of solutions or coming on the market, I guess. So I'm just interested in your outlook for the multi-operator small cell model.
Yeah, well, there certainly are some suppliers out there, some potential small cells OEMs that are trying to launch multi-operator platforms. Clearly, that always goes back to the business case of the enterprise owner and what that enterprise owner wants that mobile experience to be for their users inside their building. And most people would tell you that most people that I've talked to will almost automatically expect to have a multi-operator environment. And then when you kind of peel that onion back and help people understand that it's not only multi-operators, it's also multi-technologies. You have LTE, you have LTE Advanced, you've got 3G, you still have 2G, and then it's also multi-frequency because you've got 800 megahertz, 900 megahertz, 1700, 1800, 1900, 2.1, 2.3, 2.6, all these different iterations of frequency bands. So we advocate trying to develop technologies that support all three multiple X's, multiple operator, multiple technology, multiple frequency, because it not only allows the enterprise building owner to serve more users depending on their preference for operator, but it also helps them with scaling and flexibility in the future. So a new technology comes out, let's say in 2020, let's call it 5G or something like that. A new technology comes in. Well, how does this? Do we have scalability? So those are, I think, three important aspects that people are really starting to think through, and we're seeing, obviously with our I&E platform, we believe that we've got a great use case for how a building owner or an enterprise or an operator or someone who wants to neutral host that type of ecosystem, a good platform that could be done.
Right, great. Okay, well, most of the HetNet in-building spending is still DAS, right? Distributed antenna systems at this point. Is that correct?
Well, I would say that is where most of the spending is. Yeah, I would say that's right. We have to be a little bit careful with the terms. People use the word HetNet and they think small cell, but DAS, traditional DAS, traditional DAS is the original small cell. It's also kind of the original virtualized network, the way DAS is designed to work, to share radio resources. It's kind of that whole system, but today that still is the predominant part of that.
And we hear so much about DAS in stadiums and public venues, but I think, as you mentioned a little bit earlier, that some of the other verticals are coming on strong, hospitals, higher education. Are there any other verticals that you see is really emerging with DAS demand?
Well, we see a lot of discussions around higher education. Why? Well, obviously students. The student body there are used. They grew up mobile. They're used to that mobile experience. It's also where there's a lot of research and development being done. So there's a lot of demand for high bandwidth data processing capacity. So a lot of that is very, very interesting. Uh, I would say that the high rise buildings are really good applications. Now, a lot of those super high rises are really better candidates for DAS. I mean, there's a difference between a 30-story high rise and a 110-story high rise. I mean, in terms of power and how complex that can be. But that is an area that there's quite a bit of interest in. Healthcare, still those large medical campuses. It's a good application, a really good application. It provides a platform for a lot of medical automation that I think society is starting to really demand. So we'll see some applications that will draw in that mobile experience. You already, when I go to my doctor, some of them have tablets that they keep all my medical records on, and some of them have paper. And I have a preference for the ones that have tablets, to be honest with you. But so we'll see that continue to grow in that area as well.
Okay, great. Philip Sorrells, is there anything else that you want to make sure we hear about today?
No, I think that really covers it. It's an exciting time as always. We're looking forward to a strong 2015 and to continue to work with you guys at RCR and share ideas and collaborate with the industry.
Well, we do appreciate it. Philip Sorrells, Vice President of Strategic Marketing at CommScope. Thank you very much for your time today.
You bet. My pleasure.